You're listening to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, and this is your weekly reminder to take up big space in life, laugh loudly, absorb new knowledge, and continue to grow and expand. What She Said is your space for the big conversations that matter and the little joys that make life sweeter. This is where empowerment meets self-care and mansplaining has no seat at the table. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's jump into it because life's too short not to embrace the good stuff while we tackle the tough stuff. Today we're talking about AI, and not in the shiny, the future is here kind of way that makes everyone either giddy or terrified. I'm coming at this from a much more human place, because I already feel like we've lost a lot of real connection thanks to the internet, social media, and the fact that half the people arguing online with you are bots trying to ruin your day on purpose. And now AI is adding fuel to that fire. My guest is Joanne Morrison. She's a Canadian author and entrepreneur who works in customer experience, and she's been thinking deeply about what we gain and what we lose as more of our communication gets handed over to machines. We talk about where we really are with AI today, what's hype and what's real, and why a lot of what companies are calling AI in customer service is basically just old automation with a new label. We also get into the pressure companies are under to adopt AI as a cost-cutting move, why so many chatbots are still painfully bad, and where AI can actually be helpful without destroying trust and wasting people's time. And then we take it where I always want to take it, human connection. What happens when we outsource more and more of our communication to machines? What it means for women and for work, which jobs are most at risk in the near term, and which ones we will always want a human for. Joanne also shares why she's skeptical that we're anywhere close to artificial general intelligence, why panic about mass unemployment may be overblown, and why the need for real in-person connection might end up being one of the biggest growth areas of the future. Okay, let's get into it and hear what she said. So, Joanne, before we get into customer service and marketing, let's talk about where we really are with AI today. What's hype and what's reality?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question to ask and crucial to kind of level set here because I think a lot of the fear mongering and some of the doom and gloom that we hear with respect to massive job losses it's based on an AI model that doesn't yet exist and honestly may never exist. So what we have today is narrow AI. And within narrow AI, there are a few different branches that we'll talk about. So we've seen AI that can play a chess game, for example. So that goes as far back as the 1990s. IBM had its Deep Blue AI bot, which defeated the world chess champion at the time. So that was an example of AI doing one thing extremely well. Then, a couple years ago, we moved into generative AI. So again, this is still classified as narrow AI. So here we have ChatGPT, which is a good example of that. And this is where I think a lot of people, including myself, really started to take notice because now you have a machine that's really able to generate images, write blog posts, and do very creative tasks, which until that point was only in the purview of what humans could do. And so again, kind of the third level that we've seen more recently within again, this context of narrow AI is agentic AI. So think about self-driving cars. So this is where we give the machine the task of, for example, with autonomous driving, you have to go from point A to point B, and the AI has to figure out all of the steps to do that. And it has a lot of latitude to make decisions within that context. So yeah, self-driving is a good example of that. Even the latest version of ChatGPT has an agent model that now offers that option for agentic capabilities. So that's kind of where we are today. And then, where people kind of talk about where we could potentially go in the future would be along the lines of artificial general intelligence. So this is really AI that mimics the range of human intelligence, but it's important to understand that this is really theoretical at this point. And then beyond that, we start talking about artificial superintelligence, where the AI surpasses human intelligence. So again, this is all theory, and a lot of breakthroughs really need to happen before we get there. Agentic is kind of one bridge to that goal of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Um, but yeah, a lot more needs to happen before we get there.
How far away do you think we are from that AGI that everybody holds up as sort of the gold standard of AI when we're going to come into this brand new amazing world? How far away do you think we are? Because I was reading something this week about an AI bubble that we're sort of sitting in, sort of like the tech bubble, of
Mhm.
2000. What was that? 2008. Anyway, it was a long time ago. It feels like a long time ago now. But so where are we with this AI? Are we in a bubble? Is it sort of a lot of hype for AGI that's just not going to come as soon as people think it might?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. And I don't think anyone really knows. And the reality is there's really no consensus on the topic. So, people, you might hear anywhere from 5 years to never. Um, and so the reality is the tech community is very divided about artificial general intelligence and its feasibility. And I will tell you, the more I learn about this, the more skeptical I am that it will ever happen, um, because I think a lot of big breakthroughs need to happen. One of the reasons why some people in the tech world think that it's possible is because, the thought is, well, we understand the mechanics of the human brain and how that works. So if we understand that, the anatomy of it, why wouldn't we be able to replicate it at some point? But I still think that's a pretty big leap, honestly. I think there's a lot more to the human brain than purely the mechanics. Um, so yeah, my personal opinion is I am a little skeptical. And I think we also need to keep in mind that a lot of the people who are positioning this as an inevitability and kind of a done deal, saying it's only a matter of time, these are the same people and companies that are really benefiting from massive investment in these areas. So, of course, they're incented to say that it's possible. And, I read an article just a couple of days ago. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, he's already kind of trying to change the definition of artificial general intelligence by asking, well, if a future version of ChatGPT could solve quantum gravity, for example, and explain how it did it and all the steps that it took, would that be considered AGI? And so, again, the consensus on that is divided. And I think the other issue is that a lot of the people who are making the most noise about this and predicting we're going to have 90% unemployment and doing all the fear mongering, they're the ones who are getting the most media attention. So these are the statements that make headlines and get clicks, and those are the people being booked on podcasts. I think the people who are taking a more measured approach to this aren't necessarily getting as much attention. Now, having said all of that, I am confident that narrow AI and specifically agentic will really continue to improve. It's going to become a lot more sophisticated and reliable. And so, um, even if we never get to AGI, just the improvements to agentic really has the potential to really transform our society, both positively and negatively.
So let's talk about AI then as it relates to customer service. Um, my feelings on it right now are annoyance. I'm
Yeah.
not a fan at all. I'm not sure how you feel, but we all sort of know the frustration of being stuck with a bot that just repeats the FAQs block back at us. So why is it still so bad?
Well, I agree, it's terrible. In addition to working in the industry, I am also a consumer. So, just like you do, I get stuck with these chat bots that, put me in a continuous loop where I'm having to repeat myself. So, a couple things I will say about this. Um, One, I think some of the AI that we see in customer service is actually not really AI. It's just old automation. The advisory firm Gartner actually coined a term to refer to this called agent washing. So this is where these AI software companies are trying to repackage old technology as AI when it really isn't. Um, Now, the most common scenario that we all encounter when we're trying to talk to a chatbot or an automated voice assistant, it's technically AI, but it's called cheap AI. So most of these chatbots are using a system called RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And so they're generating a conversational response. They're saying, "Hi, how are you today? How can I help you?" But then they're still just on the back end, just retrieving information from a knowledge base. So this is why if you say, "Hey, I checked the FAQs and I can't find what I'm looking for," it's only going to pick up on that term FAQ and it's going to say, "Well, here's some FAQs for you." And, this is where we get into that absolute frustration. Um, and I think what companies really need to understand, and I think they're starting to get it, the reality is that as a consumer, we never want to get in touch with a contact center. Like, whoever wants to do that? We only take that step when we've already looked online, we've already searched the FAQs, we've exhausted all of the information available to us. So by the time we initiate a chat with the customer service team, our inquiry at that point is probably pretty complex. But instead of getting our problem solved, we just get locked into this loop situation.
Which I
And
think, in my opinion, creates a really negative opinion of the company that you're dealing with. Because personally, I know anymore when I have to deal with anything customer service, I go right for give me a human contact, give me a person. I want to bypass this whole chatbot experience. And if I can't bypass that experience, it leaves a really bitter taste in my mouth because it's frustrating to know that this person is not going, or this bot, not person, this bot is not going to get what I'm saying. Whereas if I was talking to a person, we could just get right to the point.
right. And there's usually a certain amount of context that is missing that it just does not have. I mean, I will say, I think the technology exists to provide a really great AI chat or voice bot experience with the agentic models that we have today. But part of the problem is these solutions just require a ton of processing power and are way too expensive for most companies to do at scale, which is why we end up with these inferior models. And it's actually still cheaper in most cases for companies to employ human agents offshore than to deploy that really good AI solution. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it really, I think, damages the trust that consumers have in companies. And I mean, even if a company was willing to absorb the expense of agentic AI, it still presents a lot of risks because agentic means that the AI, again, has a lot of latitude to make mistakes. And it often does because it's still, imperfect at this point. It still hallucinates. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, you kind of have some solutions that, at least for right now, we may have a different conversation a year from now. But right now, these are kind of a lose-lose for everyone because they're expensive for companies to deploy. Customers don't trust them. They're bad for the environment because they use so much processing power. And they're potentially taking away jobs. So, really no one's winning here.
So, in your opinion, what is a more effective tactic that they could be taking? Is it to stick with humans until this is perfected and more affordable? Or is it a mix of both? Where should they be looking? I mean, I understand businesses are always looking for efficiencies, but just from this conversation, I'm thinking a human would be way more efficient.
Yeah. And I think companies are maybe starting to put a bit of a pause on this. Like I just read an article the other day that quoted a survey conducted by the US Census that said that AI adoption by companies actually slightly decreased in 2025 for the first time since 2022. I mean, it was like half a percentage point, but still, you would expect that, if the technology was working as expected, it would be kind of growing exponentially in terms of adoption, but it's just not, for all the reasons that we've talked about. So I think companies are starting to take a more measured sort of wait and see approach, and realizing that these solutions aren't necessarily ready for prime time. I think there is still a lot of applicability, not that AI needs to come to a complete standstill in customer service, but there's a lot of utility on the back end. Like I've seen some really interesting technology that can train agents because, as you can imagine, in the customer service world, there's a lot of hiring that needs to happen. There's a lot of training. There's a lot of turnover generally. So, the training requirements are huge. We do a lot of role plays in customer service to make sure that the agent really, can understand how to solve a customer's problem. So some of that can kind of use AI. And then that, I've heard from agents that they actually, in some cases, really like that because it's not as awkward to role play with an AI tool as it is to do that with a human being where you kind of get embarrassed and you feel like you're being judged, which you are. So and it also makes for a much more objective experience as well. And also for data analysis. So improving customer experience, it's very dependent on analyzing trends in the data. And, nowadays it wasn't always like this. We used to record like a portion of the calls that we would get. Now, most companies are recording 100% of the contacts. So this is just a massive amount of data to sift through. So if you have a really smart human on one end asking the right questions, and AI can be very useful for extracting those answers.
So let's move on to marketing then, because I think we're seeing AI being used a lot in marketing. And are businesses chasing efficiency here at the expense of connection with consumers? Can you talk about where marketing is getting it wrong with AI and then maybe right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I own a marketing agency and I tell my staff, like, use AI. If it absolutely use it. If it's going to make you more efficient, um, it can be a great tool, but I don't ever want to know that you used it. So in other words, it really shouldn't be obvious. I think when it becomes obvious, particularly when people are using it, and I have a bit of a bias because my background is in writing. So I think most AI writing is pretty terrible. Like that's my bias. Um, but I think using it as a replacement for the human mind rather than using it as a tool is where we get into trouble. Particularly in business to business marketing, where we're trying to create content that demonstrates thought leadership, shows that we're experts in our field, and we're trying to gain the trust of clients who might be spending many millions of dollars with us. Um, so, when you get into these kind of AI situations where you're not really telling the potential prospect anything new and you're not applying the experience and creativity that you should, I think it becomes a problem. I recently downloaded a report from one of the big advisory firms, um, and the topic was AI and customer service. So, of course, I was interested in that. But as I was starting to read it, I just started to feel like, oh, I really cannot connect with these words. Like something is off. And then I realized, oh, I think this is AI written. And sure enough, when I plugged it into an AI detector, It was 100% AI written. So I would suggest in that scenario, I mean, they could have used AI as a first draft, but it needs a lot of massaging to really get it to where it should be so that it's well written and, people can connect with it and it has something new to say.
So what do you want?
What do I want? I want to use my degree for good. And in general.
I kind of meant like a muffin or a latte.
I want a job with a generous work-from-grocery-store policy.
You are here a lot.
Debbie, please, I'm working.
I want a job that will change the world.
Ma'am, this is a drive-thru.
And some nuggets.
With LinkedIn's new AI-powered job search, you can find roles that match your unique skills so you can dare to discover more. Visit linkedin.com/jobs to learn more.
I've used AI since it came out. What was it, 2021 when ChatGPT hit? And one of the things when you start to really learn and play with AI to see how it can help you, you start to notice repeating patterns. So for me, I can pick out an AI written article or an AI written social status almost immediately because there's a lot of repeating phrases or things that it does a lot. Like, this isn't X, it's Y. I see it all the time being used, and it drives me insane because I know that came from ChatGPT. And I think as soon as I see that, I immediately feel like, well, I'm not really connected to this piece anymore because I feel like I can't trust it. I know it's weird. It's a weird disconnect because there's a human behind it directing the AI, but it's that end result that matters the most. So for women entrepreneurs in particular, who are, who often invest in trust and authenticity as their brand, what's the risk of leaning too hard on AI for content?
Yeah, well, I think there is a risk, if you're not, like I said, kind of doing a lot of massaging, just adding your own perspective at the end, I mean, there are telltale signs for sure. Like when I see the word Foster's, I'm pretty sure that is AI, and you see that combined with a lot of other words and you just know. But what I will say is I've worked with a lot of people who are just brilliant in their fields, but maybe not necessarily good writers. Maybe English is not their first language. And if AI can really help them communicate their expertise and help them get their points across and communicate better, then I would say absolutely use it. But yeah, I would say you definitely need to be conscious of not sounding like everyone else. And I think really what we all should be doing, I would recommend that everyone listening, buy the latest version of ChatGPT and really experiment with AI prompts. I think that will be hugely helpful. For example, the other day, so again, I think just like with customer service, I think there's less applicability in using AI on the front end of marketing to communicate with your prospects, but more applicability on the back end. So, for example, for one of my clients, I was working on some web page copy, and I wanted to be able to see how it would lay out on the page, and I wanted to be able to show them that as well. So I wanted to create like a wireframe, so that we could see how the layout would potentially look. I didn't want to spend the 8 hours it was going to take me to learn a new software program to do that. But I spent about an hour using ChatGPT to generate that for me. And I say it took an hour because it didn't give me what I wanted on the first ask. It was a lot of prompting and reprompting. But in the end, I got what I wanted, investing 1 hour versus 8 hours. So, I think experimenting with those prompts, is something that everybody should be carving out time for.
I think top of mind for most people when they think about AI are jobs. So when you look at the near term, which jobs do you think are most at risk from automation or AI?
Well, this is a conversation I have all the time with my sons who are getting close to finishing their education and, looking toward a very uncertain job market, quite frankly. I think a lot of entry level white collar jobs are at risk, which creates problems for the new graduates who would be most likely to occupy those jobs. And I don't think blue collar jobs are immune to the effects of AI either. I mean, drivers for sure are definitely at risk with the advances in autonomous driving. We've already seen robot lawnmowers. Tesla is really doing incredible things with robotics. They hosted an event that had an AI bartender actually mixing drinks. But ultimately, I think the best insurance against losing your job to AI is just to make sure that you do it really exceptionally well, because then AI can be your assistant rather than replacing you.
What about jobs that will always need a human touch? I mean, I think about therapists, nurses, hairdressers. Like, I would not want a robot cutting my hair. So, what about those jobs? Those things that require that human touch. Do you think they'll be impacted by AI at some point?
I would say less so. I think there are tons of ways that AI could be used, but then the question becomes, should it be used and do we want it? So teaching is an example of that. I mean, I think we learned during COVID that education can be software and platform driven, but I don't know one parent who would want their child educated by AI instead of by a human. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think again that need for human connection is always going to be there. So, I think certain jobs will probably escape AI replacement for sure.
Well, let's talk about connection a little bit, because I've certainly, I've been in the digital realm since about 2009. I think when it was Twitter first came on the scene. So I've watched sort of this evolution of the internet, and right now, I don't know how often you're on social media, but a lot of what I see on social media are bots. The dark side of AI, frankly, that will come in and argue with you. If you've said, I like oranges, it'll come in and start an argument because their whole purpose is to incite rage and to make you angry. And I think we see this a lot on these social platforms. So people are pulling away from that. How can AI foster real connection? Or do we have to just step back from it and really go in hard on real physical connection again?
Yeah, I mean, I think physical connection, it's very important. And I think it can be like a big growth industry in the future. Mm, I think we're going to see more psychological issues pop up among heavy users of AI. There's already a term that's been coined called AI psychosis, when people are typing in their slightly delusional thinking into something like ChatGPT, and then the AI starts to reinforce their thinking. So they get into this echo chamber that's even worse than what we've been finding online. Um, I was approached recently by a company that they offered me a writing job, actually, creating characters for their platform, which was an offering of AI boyfriends and girlfriends. So I did not take that job. But, this just kind of goes to show where we could be headed and all of the weirdness around that.
Well, we're at this sort of stage in civilization where we're at peak loneliness because we spend so much time online. We're isolated, alone, and so those feelings of needing somebody in your corner, and whether that's AI or an actual person, is going to become more and more difficult. And so when I think about somebody at home who's alone, I mean, my AI chatbot thinks I'm brilliant. It tells me every time I ask it a question, that's brilliant, Candace. This has never been thought of in the history of humanity until you brought it to my attention. I mean, it goes on and on. Now, if I wasn't psychologically sound, which, that could be argued, I guess, but if I wasn't psychologically sound, that might actually really play with me. if I wasn't skeptical, didn't understand how it worked and why it did that. And I think these are the risks we're really running into when we talk about that. And people leaning into AI for therapy, I think, is incredibly dangerous.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, the issue is only going to get worse because I think the agentic AI that we're seeing today is going to improve. And yeah, like you said, we can definitely see the allure of that. Yeah, of course, I want somebody to tell me that my ideas are great. My
Yeah.
partner's not going to do that all the time, that's for sure, right? And definitely not my kids. So yeah, you know, the lure, the allure is definitely there.
So, I mean, I feel like I'm going to give a plug to my own business here, but I only say this because I've been looking, as I said, over at the digital world here for a while, and I feel myself pulling back because I feel what we need is more human connection, not less. And so, do you think the need for human connection is going to become a growth industry in the future?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think any job that we decide to do, any business we decide to start that brings people together, either for travel, events, or doing something that facilitates an experience, I think, that's going to be really important. And, I mean, let's face it, like, even when we're trying to sell a product or service, having that face to face interaction, um, it's going to be much easier to gain consumer trust when we have, a face of the business, for lack of a better term.
So you've said you don't buy into the panic about mass unemployment, but you also are obviously not ignoring AI's impact. So what does a middle ground look like for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think we'll see like the 90% unemployment, the doomsday scenario. But I think agentic AI, as I've said, will get a lot less expensive to deploy. I think it'll get better. But ultimately, I think jobs are going to change rather than disappear. I mean, this is what we have seen historically with other types of technology. Arguably, AI has more potential to be disruptive. But I think really what it will do is allow us all to become much more productive, allow companies to become more productive, create more output. Similar to what computers have done for us. So obviously, individuals and businesses are able to do much, much more in a day with a computer than they ever could with a typewriter, right? Um, and there was an example of a very disruptive technology. So I think in a sense, we have been here before. So if we think about the transition at the beginning of the 20th century from the horse and buggy to the car, I mean, that was a 10-year time frame um, where the horse and buggy was completely wiped out. So, like, that's pretty rapid when you think about it. And there were whole industries built up around horses and buggies. You have the people who made the saddles and the bits and all of those things. And so we really didn't see unemployment increase during that transition. It's just that those businesses folded and people who had done those types of jobs just had to find something else to do. And there were a lot of jobs being created in auto manufacturing and repair and those types of things. So, I don't necessarily think that we're going to see a net job loss. It'll just be different jobs that we're going to be doing.
Do you think there's any risk in consumers settling for good enough AI or being forced to settle for good enough AI interactions instead of, demanding or pushing back and looking for that real human service? I think about big companies like Meta and Google. I mean, try to contact a person. It's
Right.
impossible. It's forced upon us to accept that. So do you think that humans will just accept, oh, well, this is our new reality? Or do you think there will be a pushback and demand for more of that human interaction?
Well, Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I think ultimately Western society is capitalist, which has its pros and cons, but it does mean that we can make selections about which companies we're going to deal with based on the level of service that we receive. So, I mean, I think it becomes a little bit more difficult or a lot more difficult when we're talking about industries that are dominated by maybe a handful of companies that we all have to deal with. Because
The
then,
oligarchs.
exactly, yeah, because then realistically we do have less choice. And I mean, even as Canadians, I think we have less choice. Because, let's face it, we have a handful of banks, we have a handful of telecom companies. So we are a little bit more at the mercy of these companies. But look, there were a lot of quick service restaurants, particularly in the US, that had tried to deploy automated order taking systems at drive-throughs. That turned out to be a disaster. We're messing up orders, and there was tons of backlash on social media that ultimately led to those drive-throughs being taken down. Like, nobody wants bacon being put on their ice cream. And, it just became kind of a comical thing. But this was a situation where people pushed back and said, we're not going to tolerate this, right?
So if you look 10 years out, do you think we'll regret letting AI take over too much, or will we have found a balance that works for us?
Well, I think that if we ever do manage to crack the code on artificial general intelligence, that then leads to artificial superintelligence, I think that will be a Pandora's box that we will for sure regret opening. However, as I've said, I think that's a very big if. But I think ultimately the world is always working and striving to maintain a balance, and a degree of balance always ends up prevailing.
So what gives you hope when you look at how AI and human connection might coexist?
Well, I think what makes me hopeful is I think, 5 to 10 years from now, we may all have our own AI assistant that just helps us with the tasks we don't want to do. And I think from that perspective, most of us will be very happy to adopt that. It's going to make our lives better. Again, I think there's always going to be a pro and a con to this. If we think about our mobile phones, I mean, I can't imagine living without my phone, because it does make my life better ultimately, in many ways. But then it has its disadvantages as well. So, I think to the extent that AI can help us, I think we'll be very happy to adopt areas of it.
All right, amazing. So where can people reach out to you, Joanne, if they want to learn more or just connect with you and your business? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so my company is called Outmarket. So they can find me on outmarketbpo.com, which stands for Business Process Outsourcing. So outmarketbpo.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Joanne Morrison Outmarket. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insights.
Thank you, Candace. It's a pleasure.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share it with someone who'd love it too. And don't forget to hit subscribe to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, on your favorite podcast app. It's the easiest way to stay connected. Want more? Sign up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com to get all the latest updates, and let's keep the conversation going on social. You can find What She Said on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find me on Threads, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Candace Said. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Marianne Weisenthal, host of the LifeSpeak podcast, a show where we dive into real conversations about mental health, resilience, and navigating life's everyday challenges. Each episode, I sit down with leading experts in health, work, and wellness to unpack big topics like burnout, parenting, leadership, anxiety, and personal growth. My guests share their own stories of struggle and resilience, and together we keep it honest, relatable, and practical. Whether you're looking for fresh perspectives or just a moment to feel seen and supported, you'll find it on the LifeSpeak podcast.
Motherhood is complex. 1 minute, you're soaking up the sweetest, most heart-melting moments with your kids, and the next, you're hiding in the pantry with a fistful of chocolate, wondering if you're the only one making it all up as you go. Spoiler, we all are. I'm Scotty, a mom of 3, life coach and intuitive, who finally said, screw it. I'm done trying to do motherhood the quote right way, and I started trusting my mom tuition instead. Because the right way is whatever works for you. Momplex is where we cut through the noise, ditch the guilt, and figure out how to actually enjoy being a mom without losing ourselves in the process. I'm not here to tell you how to parent. I'm here to help you stop overthinking, stop comparing, and stop feeling like you're failing because you're actually doing so much better than you think. This is a real, unfiltered, explicit as hell mom talk that you will not get in the carpool line. So let's do this. Real convos, lots of laughs, and a whole lot of truth bombs. Welcome to Momplex. P.S. This podcast is explicit. So unless you want your kids casually dropping F-bombs at preschool, grab your earbuds, mama.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.